Hello, welcome back to the Lake Lawrence YouTube channel. Today we're going to talk about lake level water monitoring, how you can do it to monitor your lake levels and help improve your lake's ecosystem. In approximately 1970, one of our lake members put a water gauge at the end of his dock to measure the level of the water in the lake over the years. In 1986, when the Lake Management District was formed, he brought that information to the steering committee as a member of the steering committee and continued to report it until approximately 2018, when the device became unserviceable and old. At that time, the steering committee started looking for alternatives to continue to collect the data because we found it interesting and important and historically relevant. We contacted the University of Washington, who suggested looking at a new program that had just been funded by the National Aeronautic and Space Administration, NASA. In 2017, the steering committee reached out to the NASA project grant recipients, shown here, University of Washington in Seattle, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in North Carolina, and Tennessee Tech University. We coordinated to have 2 lake level monitoring devices installed in September of 2018. And we coordinated with lake volunteers to select 2 easily accessible sites, one at each lake basin, East Basin and the West Basin of Lake Lawrence, where volunteers would be willing to collect and report data at least bi-weekly. NASA satellites would fly over every couple of weeks to take photos to determine the surface area of the lake, and citizen scientists, the volunteers, would take the lake level measurements every couple of weeks.
2018, September to be more precise, we installed 2 gauges on Lake Lawrence. One was in the north end of the main lake or East Lake, and one was right here on the north end of West Lake. A total of 10 Washington State lakes received these gauges through this program. This is the gauge located at LAW2 on the north end of West Lake Lawrence. As you will see in the satellite photo of Lake Lawrence, these gauges were strategically located to ensure the best results for water measurement. What I'm going to do now is do a little maintenance on this gauge and clean it up. Do this a couple times a year. You can see the algae gets to them pretty good. And to be able to see the measurement as it goes down, you got to get down there and get that algae off. Not to say that it won't come back real soon. The other thing that we do here at this particular gauge is our volunteer has a thermometer that he keeps in the water. And right now we are at 68 degrees. That's surface temperature. We normally check the surface temperature a couple times a month, and Frank Hudick, who manages this program and this site location, enters that data on a spreadsheet and reports it to the Lake Management District Steering Committees quarterly. It gives us an idea of how the water is warming up. And between the water levels and the water temperature, we're hoping that historical data over time will give us a better indication of when we might expect algae blooms or weed growth, extensive weed growth or light weed growth. We just don't know yet. We're hoping that some historical data will start to point that out to us. So we're out at XAW2. This is another measurement site on the north end of East Lake Lawrence, or the main lake. We're going to clean it up, make sure that the readings can be seen down below the water line when the water depth gets down there. Okay, you can see it's not that hard. It doesn't take a lot of time.
As I just mentioned in the video that you saw, these were the lakes that the NASA project put gauges on in 2018 in Washington State, a total of 10 lakes. The project managers for the program came out to each location. They installed the gauges and continued to monitor the progress. These are two of those representatives from North Carolina, Chapel Hill, coming out and installing the gauge at the XAW2 location. And as you see from the left picture, they at first put it in there, and then they ended up moving it further out to the right so that it was better visible from the dock and didn't interfere with bringing kayaks and other small boats up alongside the dock to tie up. The purpose of the program was to determine what impacts lake volumes the most: precipitation, water table height, evaporation, or some other factor. Knowing the answer to this, they figured, would help researchers better understand how water moves in relation to the lake and in the surrounding land. The second reason was to understand how the volume of water in a given lake changes over time. They figured by compiling the information obtained from the satellites from NASA and the lake level reporting obtained by our volunteers that reported it, researchers could gain an understanding on how the volume of water in a given lake is changing over time. This is where the two gauges were installed in 2018. You can see the area up there, XAW2 in the north end of Lake Lawrence East, and LAW2 located in the north end of Lake Lawrence West. And then in 2021, they installed a lake gauge at the public boat launch, TCW2. At the same time, gauges were installed at 8 other lakes in Thurston County.
So as you can see, the lake level measurement gauge has been hit by a boat again. This is the 12th of June. Last time we repaired it was in April. So we're going to put our waders on and go out and fix it again. This is what happens when a boat hits it. I'm going to clean this thing off. Before I do that, I'm going to turn my camera off and put it away so that I don't drop it in the water. And then I'll show you what it looks like after I fix it. You can see what it looks like now that we've fixed it. The Lake Lawrence Lake Management District Steering Committee put a couple of these in our lake back in 2018. But the program was so successful that we recommended in 2019 to the county that they install them in other Thurston County lakes. They finally did that in 2021 in June, and they installed them at public places, primarily boat launches, where the public could interact and submit data by texting. You can see that by texting TCW2 and the current level to 206-823-2494. Now each lake that has this gauge starts out with TCW and then has another number behind it. So you can text the appropriate lake to that information, and then you can go online at www.locss.org to view the data that's been placed on there for the last few years. Now, what I'll say about this is that this gauge has only had 18 readings on it since it was installed, and that's primarily because last January, just like recently, a boat hit it, dislodged it, turned it, and people couldn't take a picture or snap a picture or even read the gauge from the shoreline. Back out in April and we fixed the sign and turned it back around. And then as you just noticed, the sign was dislodged again just over this last weekend, and this is the 12th of June. So we came back out today and turned the sign around, tightened it down, so people can begin taking those measurements again. And hopefully we'll have more citizen scientists, they call the program, take lake measurements and report it to the website. You can capture all the information you want about this program at www.locss.org.
These are those lakes shown in the bottom left here: Long Lake, Pattison Lake, Offutt Lake, Lake St. Clair, McIntosh Lake, Black Lake, Deep Lake, Summit Lake, and then a third gauge at Lake Lawrence, again, to allow citizen scientists, the public, to engage in the process. Program coordinators came out annually to check gauges, clean and adjust gauges as necessary. And this particular time, we found that the gauge was too high. The water levels that summer had dropped below the gauge, so it could not be read after a certain point. So when these folks came out from North Carolina Chapel Hill University, we moved the gauges with the help of Lake Management District volunteers, both the XAW2 site and the LAW2 site. These gauges benefit lakes by providing accurate data on lake levels that can assist with lake surveys, assist in making lake treatment decisions, informs lake residents when water levels are higher or lower than normal, and this information is put out to our members on a quarterly basis, or more frequently if needed. Long-term historical information could lead to a better understanding of water quality, aquatic weed, and algal issues. And this data shows the historical data collected since initiation of this program from September of 2018 to present. The dam level, the dark black line going across the graph, shows the high water mark for the lake. Once our lake reaches that level each year, water starts pouring out the outflow to keep the lake level from flooding residential properties. We have a separate video on the outflow creek that is well worth watching. You can see the highs and lows of water level year after year and how consistent it is. You can see that in 2022, we had an unusually heavy rain and snowpack in the mountains, which increased our high water level considerably over 2021 and 2020. 2019 was a relatively low water year, a lot less rain, a lot less snowpack, which directly impacts your lake water levels and your lows for the year in the summer. As you can see, in 2019, we hit one of the lowest water levels. The more rain or snow we received each year corresponds directly with the high water levels. So much rain and snow fell in and around the lake, the outflow creek could not keep up with the inflow of the water. Then over the summer months, the levels fall below the dam, and it shows how evaporation impacts lake levels. Water cannot be removed from Lake Lawrence for drinking irrigation, so the only way water escapes our lake is through evaporation. This graph shows this year's data for 2023 so far. As you'll see, we hit our high just in January, which is about when we hit it each year. Went down a little bit in February, and then we started coming back up in May. And we'll start going down relatively soon. So all of these sites that were put in 2021 were put in and installed at public places, primarily boat launches, so that the public could engage. This is a U.S. and worldwide monitoring summary. There are gauges located in North Carolina, New York, Washington, Illinois, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Indiana, Ohio, Canada, France, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, and Chile. Currently, there are 35 gauges at 33 different lakes in Washington State. There are 12 gauges at 10 different lakes in Thurston County. The program has led to a renewal of the grant by NASA. Here's the information to access the site data. Now, people often ask, well, what happens when the grant funding ends? Well, we've been told that other grants may continue the program if it's as successful as it has been. The site data may or may not be available after the grant funding ends, so lakes should maintain their own site data. Lakes can continue to use these gauges. They're not going to be removed. They can collect the information and maintain their own data, which is what we intend to do. We sincerely hope you have enjoyed this short video. If you did, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the Lake Lawrence YouTube channel so you will get automatic updates when new content is posted.